Hi everybody, this is Jim Aikin. This month we're going to be talking about modulation signals. We'll talk about what they do and how to route them, how to invert them, control them, various things like that. In the rack this month we have a fairly simple setup. We have a mixer from Bog Audio and a Valley Plateau reverb. Other than that, and an attenuator from AS. Other than that, this is all stock VCV modules. We've got one oscillator. We've got a filter. We've got a mixer, which is being used as a VCA. And a few other things. We've got a couple of envelope generators here, a couple of LFOs, and a scope, so you can see what the modulation looks like. Now, at the moment, there's no modulation. The tone, I can move the filter cutoff manually, but I've only got one mouse, and so I can't do a lot of stuff simultaneously with that. Instead, let's have this LFO here modulate the VCF. Now, as you can see, the frequency, the modulation signal is coming from the attenuator up to the frequency, and it's arriving at the attenuator from this LFO here. So as I turn up the attenuation amount, this is 0 when it's in the middle. You'll hear that there's modulation being applied to the filter cutoff frequency. Now, this knob here controls the amount of that. So if I double click that, and it should go back to 0. There you go. Now the fact that there's an LFO signal arriving doesn't do anything. You can see the little light blinking there, but it's not doing anything because this is set to 0. So in order for the modulation to reach the filter cutoff, we both have to turn this up and turn this up. And of course, we could change the speed of the LFO. And you can see in the scope what's going on. So let's turn that one back to 0. And now we're going to try modulating the oscillator frequency from a different LFO. I can slow it down, speed it up, and exactly as with the filter, we have here an FMCV knob. If I turn this down to 0, it doesn't matter what's going on over here. We have to have both of them active. Now let's slow that down. You can hear that the sawtooth wave, we're modulating this with the sawtooth wave, which is coming from here, going up to there, and then going up to there. And the sawtooth wave is rising. Now, we can invert that by turning this knob down below 0. There you go. Now we have a falling sawtooth. And we might, if the pitch is too low, we might also want to apply an offset. So this just adds an amount to the modulation, whatever it is. Set that back to 0. Turn it back to positive. So that's the simplest form of modulation. We route from a modulation source through an attenuator to a destination, and we can, if we like, invert the amount. There are other things we can do, though. How about merging two LFOs and sending them to the same place? I've routed both of my LFOs from the attenuator over to this mixer. Or do they come from the attenuator or do they come directly? No, I think they're coming directly from the LFOs into this mixer. So instead of modulating the oscillator from one LFO, we're going to get a signal from a mixer and use two LFOs at the same time. Or let's get that square wave. So you can do all sorts of interesting things by mixing two modulation signals together. Another thing we can do, though, is we can multiply one by another. So at this point, I've got an LFO. In fact, this is all coming from the LFO square wave. And I've had to run them through a merge module for reasons to do with how VCV handles polyphony. And so the merge signal is going into a VCA, and that is being opened up by this envelope generator here. So you can see that this shows the amount. But we're still getting the modulation from over there. We don't want that. We want to get it from here. Now we're going to... The modulation starts at a high level because this ADSR has a long decay time. Let's speed up the LFO. So this is an example of multiplying one modulation signal by another using a VCA on the way over to the oscillator frequency. If we wanted to, we could do that on the filter instead. That's maybe more interesting musically, huh? So let's add a little reverb to it. Or maybe a lot of reverb. The reason I put this reverb in here was because I wanted to mention that some modules have their own modulation built in. This one has a modulation rate, modulation shape, and modulation depth knob. This is going to be a more subtle effect because it's modulating the reverb. So let's get rid of that filter modulation. Open the filter. Now I'm going to use the internal modulation of this module to change the sound of the reverb. If we get rid of the dry signal and just listen to the wet reverb, we'll hear more. It'll be easier to hear anyway. So as you can hear, we can pretty much destroy the sound using modulation. And that's enough for this month, I think. Next month, we will take a look at envelope generators, which are maybe the most important way of adding modulation to your sounds.